why can't they see rapes, or assaults, or suicides?
There's nothing more destructive to the metaphysical fabric that binds us than the untimely murder of one human being by another.
This consideration to the metaphysical nature of murder and reality is a central aspect of the Philip K. Dick short story, The Minority Report. Dick was obsessed with the nature of reality. He wrote an 8,000-page exegesis because of a vision he had when a pink ray came out of a Jesus fish necklace and convinced him he was actually in ancient Rome, and Jesus' resurrection was the only thing that truly mattered, and also that Satan had constructed a false reality around him, called our modern world, to distract us from the truth. That was in 1974, towards the end of his life. But throughout his whole career, he had been thinking on simulated realities, the nature of humanity, what it means to be human, the nature of death, the nature of God, the nature of the mind, anything philosophical, psychological, theological, humanistic, or societal. He went as deep as any writer, if not deeper. Phil's contemplative depths translate into the film adaptation with remarkable fidelity. There is an exploration into all aspects of our modern lives, from the external to the psychological to the spiritual. The pre-cops in Minority Report see murders predicted by precognitives and track down the future killers based on visual clues. When one of the pre-cops, John Anderton, becomes a future murderer himself, he runs and his colleagues pursue him. The backbone of such a story is, naturally, the question that if someone has not done something yet, how is it a crime?
Why'd you catch that?
Because it was gonna fall.
You're certain?
Yeah.
The fact that you prevented it from happening doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen.
An interesting framework to examine an issue that we all deal with. Is the future set in stone? Can we change it? A precop is kind of like a consequence of existence. My family lineage, my past traumas, things that happened to me led here to this person that's capable of cheating, harming, vindictiveness, breaking the law, and given the right set of circumstances, even murder.
My God. I'd forgotten there was so many.
And to think, they'd all be out there killing people, if it wasn't for you.
Our current self, deeply interlaced with some shadow form that we hide, we contain. If we let it out at the right moment, what are we able to do?
I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubin that was to take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours, 4 minutes.
No, I didn't do anything.
If we knew what we would do, would we change anything about who we are to prevent it from happening? Food for thought.
I gotta eat.
This is the main theme of the film, and the narrative is pretty straightforward. If we can perceive what we are capable of doing, given our current selves, then we can and we should change it, lest our weaknesses are exploited, and we wreck our lives and the lives of those around us. That's the first layer, a convincing commentary. But below that layer is another, still connected to the first, that instead of critiquing an individual's behavior, it critiques society's. Aesthetically and thematically, the critique centers around Romanticism versus Existentialism. As broad as these two arenas are, the angle that each is given in the film to support the story offers a deep-cutting commentary on how society shapes us and what we'd have to do in order to overcome the negative influences that can push us into a dark, hopeless, existential hole. Being born is no doubt a gift. Existence holds a high potential for a good life as well as a bad one. From birth, the path we take can pass through a whole host of variations, but to be sure, our exposure to what is favorable as well as unfavorable is guaranteed. A society, a collection of people, a collection of minds, good and bad attributes coalesce, sink in, influence. Parents, friends, coworkers, teachers, lovers, all play a part in shaping us. Not to mention all the other people we come into contact with, acquaintances, strangers, drug dealers, users and abusers, enemies, sociopaths, psychopaths, and people drained of anything good. The scope is wide, and in any given day or life, we could run into any individual along the spectrum of persons. So as we grow and time goes on, our exposure to the spectrum increases. Good and bad influences, supportive and abusive. When we inevitably come into contact with these negative forces, how will we react? Will the negatives turn us negative? Can we resist the effects of being poisoned? If the adage of a bad apple turning the whole barrel is true, then how long would it take for the virus of a deranged mentality, capable of evil, to work its way around to all of us?
You said so yourself. There is no minority report. I don't have an alternate future. I am going to kill this man.
The trap of existence pertains to the negative onslaught stemming from people around us, flowing from the past, persisting in the present, and stretching into the future.
Is it now?
What?
Is it now? I'm tired. I'm tired of the future.
The continuum of time that we exist in speaks unto the future. What is around us will continue to be. Furthermore, what is in us that is perpetuating the continuity of what is outside of us will continue to be. Are we predestined to go on in the way we always have within the corrupted time continuum? Or can we change? The World of Minority Report, a future Washington, D.C., takes modern America and exaggerates aspects of it by projecting them into the future. D.C., despite being free of murder because of pre-crime, has a pervasive drug problem, an impoverished urban sprawl, and a high population of psychologically degenerative citizens, the mental virus spreading along the continuum. In the novel Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, we find a setting much like DC's, crime-infested and with a vast population of impoverished people. In 19th century St. Petersburg, Russia, Rodion Raskolnikov is poor and descending deeper into mental illness and philosophical radicalism. The story is a meditation on what would become known as existentialism. To be more specific, the problem with existentialism. The philosophy of existentialism holds that man is an individual facing an absurd and meaningless world. Raskolnikov believes he is above the laws and mores of men, considering them only a construct that he can subvert. He proceeds to meticulously plan and carry out the murder of a pawnbroker, a woman he deems to be worthy of death, who mistreats and extorts others. He ends up killing the pawnbroker, as well as her sister, who happens to be in the apartment at the time of the killing. The sister was an invalid and innocent. Killing her was not part of his plan, just a necessary part of preventing implication and imprisonment. As time goes on, the murder of the innocent sister begins to eat away at him. His guilt turns into hysteria, which turns into sickness, which turns into depression, then, at last, confession to the police. Dostoevsky saw the issue with existential beliefs and how this wave of philosophy would impact generations to come. In a meaningless world, everything is technically permissible. But a person is not built mentally or physically to do whatever they want. There are consequences to actions. If the law is potentially an arbitrary collection of rules that a rational person can simply disobey if they disagree, Dostoevsky's assertion is that there is a higher order built into reality, built into our very DNA, that despite our mental protests, we cannot just disregard. If someone wants to be above right and wrong, good and evil, they have to come to terms with conscience, causality, genetics, and potentially God. The punishment referred to in the title Crime and Punishment isn't about arrest or prison. That occurs at the very end of the novel. No, Raskolnikov's punishment is what occurs in his mind. Following the murder, he's disturbed, manic, detached from his environment, from others, paranoid, in emotional agony, anguish. He hallucinates, has nightmares, is consumed by guilt, confusion, disillusionment, fear, anxiety. All these psychological stressors weigh on him, causing his body to break down. He becomes sick and nearly dies. Though he commits the crime and avoids capture, his mind he can't avoid. The punishment is worse than prison, than the harsh conditions of Siberia. Even as Raskolnikov considers and plans the crime, he is in bitter isolation, cut off from humanity, full of anxiety and dread. His predicament, his state leads him to killing, His mind is pained and painted as no different than prison. That is, a dark and perturbed psychological prison. Man may be an individual who has to make decisions, staring down a cruel world full of people who are capable of great harm, but the decisions we make, first starting in our thoughts, then as these thoughts manifest as actions, must lead to what's beneficial to ourselves, to others, the metaphysical fabric that binds us. Take the psychic punishment of Crime and Punishment and transpose it into an allegory, and you have the story of Minority Report. The precops are the punishment of thoughts, of intrinsic faults. They show up before murder, before a person even conceives of a murder, in the middle of thinking about it.
This one's premeditated.
Amazing. Someone within 200 miles actually dumb enough to still do that.
The punishment arriving during the thoughts, prior to the crime. Murphy's Law states that if anything can go wrong, it will. Meaning that if there is something off, a structural defect, if you will, part of the fabrics of things, of situations, human error, and so on.
If there's a flaw, it's human. It always is.
There's an inevitability to events. Plans will not succeed if a variable prevents it, if it can't be foreseen, if it can't be prevented. The precogs act as a means of detecting these variables, the metaphysical fabric that binds us being disturbed and rippling through time, through space. A Raskolnikov is stopped before he has the chance to proliferate the toxicity of his mind, receiving his punishment because of the flaws within himself, because he was destined to go wrong.
It seems I found a flaw.
A central aspect of life. Every thought matters, every action, sent out through matter, wrapped into causality, and we don't know what will happen to us, whether by our doing or someone else's. This process seems chaotic, and within the chaos, we can deem the events that come upon us, that course through our bodies, shocking, comforting us, to be random, unbeholden, and not adding up to anything, a meaninglessness separate from order or purpose. What kind of an semblance of a life can be built out of the shattered pieces of what could have been the reason why we're here? The supposed perfect order that we should have been a part of. But instead, we're dropped into a sort of war zone consisting of hidden and unforeseeable dangers. What time bombs are awaiting us from what someone has dreamt up in the dark of thought? What someone has transmitted through their actions?
They were going to be waiting for me in the car.
He was gonna rape me.
I was going to be stabbed.
Right here.
The absurdity of it all. The meaninglessness. John Anderton's son, Sean, is snatched up at a public pool. He responds in a negative manner by taking Neuroin, a future drug that allows him to cope with the loss. Neuroin is also the drug that gives rise to the mutant bursts, which are responsible for the precogs.
This was 10 years ago when Neuroin first hit the streets. It was an impure form of the drug, not the engineered cocktail that became so popular among the more educated.
The urban sprawl, the underbelly of the city, wandering purposefully into the dark.
I understand you've been spending a lot of time in the sprawl.
I go running down there.
In the middle of the night.
Trying to find some relief, some clarity.
You want the customary clarity or the new and improved kind of clarity?
Just give me the new stuff.
It's this desperation brought on by a poisonous environment that pushes John to drastic alleviation. The same kind of desperation that spawned the popularity of Neuroin, which led to the birth defects. Then within the chaos, a miracle.
It seemed that only a miracle could stop the bloodshed. But instead of one miracle, we were given 3, the precognitives.
A response to nothingness, to meaningless pain. Minority Report cinematography was modeled after the seedy aesthetic of film noir. Director Steven Spielberg said, "I wanted to make the ugliest, dirtiest movie I had ever made. I want this movie to be dark and grainy, and to be really cold. This is the rough and tumble, gritty world of film noir." To accomplish this, the cinematographer, Janusz Kaminski, used a specific set of lenses and filters so the highlights got slightly brighter, and the shadows got slightly harder, and the colors got slightly more pastelish. Kaminski said, "We wanted to create a world that feels realistic, kind of seedy and full of shadows. we wanted it to be a dangerous world. He decided to use a bleach bypass system on the film, a process that skips the normal bleaching of emulsion on a negative, causing intense desaturation, whereby the movie looks like a color and black and white image simultaneously. The result is a grainy film full of dark shadows, little color, and blown out lights. In a word, bleak. Film noir has its roots in German Expressionism, an artistic movement which coincided with World War I that used dramatic, high-contrast lighting, also known as chiaroscuro lighting, to capture the darkness and overall atmosphere brought on by the psychological effects of oppression and war. It's no coincidence, then, that noir began to gain popularity in America around the time World War II was starting to ramp up. The film noir style, then, was usually used to enhance the seediness and immorality in a story. Shades of gray, dark shadows, low and Dutch angles, the mental resonance of a world in disarray, of a society losing its grip on some normative form of sanity, grappling with what's moral, immoral. If you could kill someone in war, why not outside of war? If someone is cheating on you, if they harmed or killed your child, if you could murder one to save many. The assertion that murder is unequivocally wrong could just be a byproduct of a society, a modern notion that should be disregarded, brushing off past limitations and cultural constructions for perfect freedom, a new type of reasoning, a new mind, a new reality, a generation of Raskolnikovs entering into a future of borderless, boundaryless activity, the postmodern mindset pervading and spreading, growing through time. It was during the 40s that postmodernism emerged, alongside World War II and film noir. Existentialism is considered a predecessor to the postmodern movement, continuing the trend of casting doubt on all things accepted and deemed right and wrong, a potentially dangerous model of thinking when applied to ethics and morality. Minority Report explores this postmodern existential landscape as it proliferates and intensifies while moving into the future. Taken to its dark extremes, what becomes of humanity when meaninglessness and nothingness replaces the narratives of civilization? Is anything worthwhile, worth effort, worth thought, when it is essentially a fabrication? In a meaningless world, it is not too surprising that a desire for pleasurable activity is hotly sought after. Albert Camus, an absurdist philosopher in the vein of existentialism and postmodernism, said that the literal meaning of life is whatever you're doing that prevents you from killing yourself. So an advertiser trying to find a way to sell a product, as unnecessary or useless as it might be, in touch with and knowing this ethos, could be part of this whatever you're doing to put off death, depression, and emptiness. There's the way that postmodernism affects advertisements. But what about the advertisers? If a person can use products to fill an existential hole, then an advertiser can use the money they gain from doing their job to fill the same hole. So as big as the wake is in society from the admission of meaninglessness, this could propel consumerism as well as the desire in those producing the products to push their merchandise on people in ever-increasing ways of inventiveness and invasiveness.
Provides gourmet cuisine.
John Anderson, you can use a Guinness right about now.
Steven Spielberg brought in a think tank of scientists, urban planners, architects, inventors, and writers to predict what the future might look like. One of the more unanimous predictions among the group was that privacy would become lost. Spielberg said, Orwell's prophecy really comes true, not in the 20th century, but in the 21st. Big Brother is watching us now, and what little privacy we have will completely evaporate in 20 or 30 years because technology will be able to see through walls, through rooftops, into the very privacy of our personal lives, into the sanctuary of our families. Screenwriter Scott Frank added, not so people can spy on you, but so they can sell to you. In the not too distant future, it is plausible that by scanning your eyes, your whereabouts will be tracked. They will keep track of what you buy, so they can keep selling to you.
Hello, Mr. Yakamoto. Welcome back to the Gap. How those assorted tank tops work out for you?
Corporations create the tech to track someone so they can sell more effectively to them. But at the same time, that tech could also be used by governments and organizations who who desire to locate a person in case they commit a crime, however arbitrary that crime may be. The loss of privacy, trapped in an Orwellian environment in which a person is monitored in order to constantly inject them with the answers to the existential hole. That are not really ever going to satisfy, because in reality, product can never negate meaninglessness. No amount of ephemeral pleasures can overcome a person's perspective. When the pleasure fades, so does the distraction. Then the cycle repeats for the next pleasure, the next product, the next fix. In the postmodern landscape, is this all life boils down to? Pleasurable consumption? Is there any escape from a meaningless outlook? Minority Report can be seen as a loose retelling of Shakespeare's Macbeth. The three precognitives can be seen as the three witches who predict the rise of Macbeth to king, as well as his downfall. The witches are portrayed as hags so odd and disfigured that they don't seem to be human. An ally of Macbeth at the beginning of the play, Banquo, describes them as, "What are these so withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on't?" In Dick's short story, the precogs are described as appearing inhuman as well. In the gloomy half-dark, the three idiots sat babbling. All day long the idiots babbled, imprisoned in their special, high-backed chairs, held in one rigid position by metal bands, and bundles of wiring, clamps. Their physical needs were taken care of automatically. They had no spiritual needs, vegetable-like. They muttered and dozed and existed. Their minds were dull, confused, lost in shadows, but not shadows of today. The three gibbering, fumbling creatures with their enlarged head and wasted bodies were contemplating the future. The analytical machinery was recording prophecies, and as the three precog idiots talked, the machinery carefully listened. The otherworldliness of these beings is a way to portray the metaphysical interruption of the natural order. In Macbeth, the witches are trying to stir up disorder in the Scottish kingdom. In the short story, the precogs unwittingly stir up a fair deal of disorder themselves.
Goodbye, Crow.
Macbeth is prophesied to be Thane of Cawdor, making him second to the king, and then king thereafter. He becomes Thane immediately after the prediction, thus proving the validity of the witch's prognostications. After hearing of this succession of events, Macbeth's wife pushes him to kill the current king and usurp him in order to fulfill the prophecy. In Dick's short story, John Anderton is predicted to murder Leopold Kaplan, who he has never heard of. Despite his utter rejection of the prophecy, Anderton does end up killing him. Likewise, Macbeth ends up killing the king. Macbeth and his wife's reason is ambition. Anderton's reason is that he reads the reports stemming from the precogs and makes a decision. In both stories, the prophecy brings on the fruition of that prophecy. At one point, each protagonist seeks out the prophets to see what will become of them after the initial prophecy. Macbeth wants to know if his kingship is secure, and Anderton wants to know if he has a minority report. Macbeth learns of his oncoming death under a certain set of unlikely circumstances, and Anderton learns that he has multiple alternate futures. In the movie, Anderton comes to understand that he has no minority report. For Macbeth, despite the unlikelihood of the predictions coming true, he does end up dying in the way the prophecies laid out. Anderton, in the short story, learns that killing Kaplan would be the best option and ends up fulfilling the prophecy. In the movie, though, something strange happens. John finds evidence that his intended victim, Leo Crow, is most likely the murderer of his sons. So in a rage, he decides he will kill him. But as the prevision is coming to pass, just as it was foreseen, the mantra of the film's most important philosophy begins. And oddly enough, Anderton chooses not to kill Crow. He saw his own future. He was aware of what he was going to do, and decided against it. Metaphorically, the precogs and the witches are the unknown, dark drives inside of us. Go outside, go to work, meet with friends, eat some food. Within it all, do we know exactly what is going to happen? No. But given our nature, do we know which way we're going to respond to what we come into contact with? Is it what's around us that makes us do what we do? The catalyst that drives us in certain directions? Or is there something in us that we cannot help that propels us forward? The psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. And until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Meaning that the more we ignore what is in our unconscious, what lies dormant, the shadow, the grisly parts of ourselves, the deformed and inhuman aspects of our nature, the more it controls us. Making these potentially unfortunate aspects in our conscious is important. Because if what propels us forward is negative, causing future harm, perpetuating current misery, and we are not willing to face it, to acknowledge it, it will control us. Into the middle of our lives will come a witch, a demon, an apparition, stemming from our experiences and heritage to set off a chain of events that will inevitably lead us into the future.
I'm not gonna commit murder. I've never met the man I'm supposed to kill.
And yet a chain of events has started, a chain that will lead you inexorably to his murder.
Are our futures set? Whatever is within us, leading us, forcing us, controlling us? Do we have free will? Jung also wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." If we can make the unconscious conscious and, knowing what is there, choose the right path, the better path, then we can avoid a dark future. Jung asserts as well that your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. The dreams generated within, unrestrained, bubbling up to the surface, manifesting something horrifying and shocking to our conscious self. We go through life picturing what we want to do next, and then making it happen, walking into it. We have fantasies, some pleasant, some benign, some startling, but we shake those off. From the midst of us comes visions of sexual misconduct, violence, revenge, murder. We may not act on them, we choose not to. But when do these constant visions and desires of the shadow bombarding us to step into a potential future wear on us enough that potentiality becomes actuality? Why are these things within us? A response to nothing? To the trap of existence? Our environment acting on us, inside of us. But if we are willing to see what is there, however it got there, and decide against it, we could choose a different path. A path that offers escape from the shadow, from the existential hole, so that when the opportunity to act out these darker tendencies arrives, it won't lead to our own destruction, or the destruction of the fabric that binds us. Romanticism was a movement that began in the late 18th century and ended around the middle of the 19th century. The era centered around the importance of emotion and individuality. The social and political theorist Isaiah Berlin wrote of Romanticism that, in the realm of ethics, politics, aesthetics, it was the authenticity and sincerity of the pursuit of inner goals that mattered. This applied equally to individuals and groups, states, nations, movements. This is the most evident in the aesthetics of Romanticism, where the notion of eternal models, a Platonic vision of ideal beauty, which the artist seeks to convey, however imperfectly, on canvas or in sound, is replaced by a passionate belief in spiritual freedom, individual creativity. The painter, the poet, the composer do not hold up a mirror to nature, however ideal, but invent. They do not imitate, the doctrine of mimesis. but create not merely the means, but the goals that they pursue. These goals represent the self-expression of the artist's own unique inner vision, to set aside which, in response to the demands of some external voice, church, state, public opinion, family friends, arbiters of taste, is an act of betrayal of what alone justifies their existence for those who are in any sense creative. Romanticism was, partly, a response to the Industrial Revolution that saw the dehumanization of people as they became cogs in a giant wheel of manufacturing. Production and profit, in many ways, took the place of personhood and fair treatment. The development of technologies offered new, exciting opportunities for wealth, speed, and convenience. But what about the deep, internal elements of consciousness, of an emotional and thoughtful human being? Berlin's summarization of the movement is that creativity, the genuine, the authentically human, is important to existence, more important than the external, which can only influence and dictate behavior. To innovate and work out of the truth within. Without this, according to the Romantics, our lives are unjustified. We're lost. In Minority Report, against the bleak tone stemming from an existential philosophy, the elimination of the natural in favor of urbanization and technology, the invasive advertising, the stifling of freedom through the removal of privacy, a romantic soul is trying to emerge and overcome the troubles stemming from its environment. A form of romanticism is not uncommon to Spielberg's work, which is often criticized for being saccharine. But in this film, the addition of the sentimentality to the harsh noir tone actually adds a heart-rending critique of existentialism. In the world of the film, there is the pitiful pit of meaninglessness that most of the characters get swept into, yet underneath is a tender emotionality that wants to be expressed, but just can't. The characters get beaten down by their existentially composed environment, filled with people that are capable of unfathomable damage.
You set your patience on fire.
I'll put them out. Some not as quickly as others, but let's change the subject, shall we?
How can one be emotionally vulnerable in such a world? Even in the midst of a happy family life, tragedy can strike. How can anyone be happy again? Nothing adds up to anything. Events just occur. And if happiness is just a chemical reaction, who needs a family? Who needs good memories? Stimulation. Physical manipulation. That's all it is.
Every creature,
no rhyme,
the earth,
no reason,
one thing,
just nothing.
And one thing only.
Survival, pleasure, nothing more.
It's on survival.
Anderton turns to Nerwin and work in pre-crime after his son is kidnapped, and Lara, his wife, leaves him because she can't stand the memory of her son when around him. Lamar Burgess, the co-inventor of pre-crime, turns to murder when he realizes that his dream of a world without murder could be taken away.
You don't choose the things you believe in. They choose you.
Our beliefs could be a simple matter of our external experiences. The tragedy of existence could be our origin, our stories, and our futures. The characters in the film are certainly subscribing to this notion, but each of their arcs is to find a way over what suffocates their spiritual freedom and expression of deeply buried internal elements. Anderton needs to find a way to move past his guilt and grief, and therefore his addiction, in order to get back to his wife. And Lara needs to get over her grief so she can return to her husband. Burgess needs to give up the belief that chose him and drove him to murder so he could have a world without murder, and find, in himself, the compassion to spare Anderton, who he looks at as a son, from the wake of his crime. Deep down, these tender, even necessary elements, in order to thrive in such an existentially consumed world, exist, but cannot appear on the surface. They are impeded by the trap, nay, tragedy of existence that the characters, it seems, are resigned to mentally experience over and over again, along with everyone else. In the midst of this conundrum of cyclical misfortune comes the emergence of the three precogs, who have the potential to put a wrench into the cycle. Dick frames them like Macbeth's witches, but the film frames them in two distinct ways. Relatively, Dick's mentally malformed beings while in the temple, the place where the precogs are imprisoned, and like heavenly entities outside the temple. In the short story, the precogs are mutants from birth and, specifically, do not have spiritual needs. But the movie takes this premise and plays with it. While in the temple, they are heavily medicated, making them look like they're mentally handicapped. But when Enderton steals the precog Agatha, in order to see if he has a minority report, she starts to emerge out of her drug-induced fugue. As it turns out, the precogs are not optimally utilized mutants. They are victims of a deeply corrupt system. It's society that has flooded their minds with horrifying images, imprisoned them, and used their gifts to make a better world. But a better world at what cost? No murder? And after the precogs are cloned, and a national initiative for pre-crime is passed, how many people will be imprisoned for things they ultimately didn't do? If people have alternate futures, a problem Anderton discovers with the pre-crime system from one of its creators, then how many are wrongfully locked up? And if people could see their futures, would they still murder with that knowledge? Society took the supernaturality of the precogs and applied it to their corrupt, natural system. The three are no different than those in prison for their pre-murders. In another Dostoevsky novel, The Brothers Karamazov, a philosophical story referred to as the Grand Inquisitor, commenting on religion and society, is told between two characters. In the story, Jesus returns to Earth during the time of the Inquisition and starts performing miracles again. Just as he starts to be loved by the people, he is arrested by the Inquisition and sentenced to be burnt to death. The Grand Inquisitor visits him in prison to inform him that the church no longer needs him, elaborating that Jesus' overall message was that people needed to choose redemption and salvation, but human nature, because of choice, dooms most of humanity to miss salvation and suffer. The Inquisitor says that man prefers peace, and even death, to freedom of choice and the knowledge of good and evil, and that it is better for individuals and society that people trade their freedom of choice for miracle, mystery, and authority. He thinks himself a person capable of freedom of choice, and that it is up to men like him to run society, rationalizing that the rest of humanity will live their lives relatively happy, but in complete ignorance. The story takes the idea that man simply will not accept the supernatural, that is, the perfect order descended from the heavens, in whatever manner it appears, because they are already consigned to rule.
In a way, they give us hope. Hope of the existence of the divine. I find it interesting that some people have begun to deify the precogs.
Precogs are pattern recognition filters, that's all.
Yet you call this room the temple.
Just a nickname.
Without choice, the operative word in the film's most important philosophy, we're doomed to a life without freedom. The precognitives are like Christ in that they, through supernatural means, offer freedom to people. The freedom to know the evil they'll do and potentially turn away. But the problem, like the Grand Inquisitor saw it, is that people, by foregoing free will in favor of the authority in society, have lost their sensitivity to the repercussions of good and evil, and are therefore doomed to wander haplessly into what is wrong and brings on suffering, even if they were given the chance to choose what is right. So, in this sense, those who have the freedom necessary to process the agonies of the knowledge of good and evil, like those who craft and uphold the law, should be the ones deciding for those who cannot bear this same agony.
Well, come on, Chief. The way we work, changing destiny and all, I mean, we're more like clergy than cops.
The Inquisitor admits to Christ that centuries ago, the church had abandoned Jesus to follow Satan, saying they accepted the offer Jesus denied in the desert, where he was tempted to worship the devil in exchange for all the kingdoms of the world. In taking up such an exchange, they planned to become the sole rulers of the earth, and eventually bring happiness to all mankind. If happiness is indeed the goal of life regardless of who is providing it, then perhaps the means justify the ends. However, in surrendering their freedom of choice to the Inquisitor, people have abandoned the providence of God and lost the basic foundations of consciousness to essentially take up the life as a slave to the ruling church and therefore the rule of Satan. Have we sacrificed our own freedom to a guiding mind, a force of will for the comfort of a system or group that promises a happy life?
Science has stolen most of our miracles.
Likewise, in the film, the freedom to choose is taken away from the people of DC, and they are instead subjugated by pre-crime to pay for the consequences of actions they haven't even committed. Lamar Burgess is like the Grand Inquisitor, in that he takes the idea posited by Nietzsche of the Übermensch, a person above the laws of man and Christian morality who presides over their own mores. He decides, in the vein of Raskolnikov, that he would have to murder in order to create a better world without murder. He locked up the precogs in the same way the Inquisitor locked up Christ, so as to play into his Übermensch mentality that actively takes the freedom of choice away from average people. His mind wishes to swallow up everybody by any means possible: the precognitives, the murderers, the average citizen, DC, the United States, the world. The Inquisitor and Burgess, in their ambitions, are reflections of those who run societies, which elicits the question, is this same Übermensch mentality ruling over us currently? And if so, what are the consequences of such a rule? The Übermensch mind is inherently godless. It is born of a perception that God is dead. No divinity, no spirituality, no meaning, where the supernatural is doubted and rationalized because it is in direct contradiction to a godless narrative, where the supernatural is mocked and overthrown. If we lack the spiritual freedom necessary to choose a different path than the one we set out on from birth, the trap of existence, the eternal recurrence of everything that has been handed to us and we are destined for, then how can we ever exceed the limitations that are in our DNA, that are passed down from our parents, our society, our government, our overmen? If the Übermensch mind, born of an existential, nihilistic belief system, is guiding the will and actions of those who have surrendered their freedom of choice, then where is it leading us? And what does the future look like? The first two acts of Minority Report are this repressive, existential world with no freedom, which is why, with the assistance of Agatha, Anderton's choice not to kill Crow is so substantial. In the moment where he is most likely to fall into the deterministic order in the manner of being controlled by the external, to yield his freedom to an existential ruling system and therefore the trap of existence, he chooses against it by finding something pure inside of himself.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be used against you in a court of law.
This whole scenario is staged by Burgess, so Anderton will not corrupt his vision to form a world without murder. Lamar used the memory of John's kidnapped son and the inner workings of pre-crime to set him up, knowing that it would drive John to kill. The plan was for Anderton to be sacrificed on the altar of ambition, to be axed out for the greater good. Because, after all, it's what the people need, a guiding force that will steer them towards happiness. Anderton is destined to fall into an existential hole, spiraling down within the trap of his own existence, full of vengeance, rage, hate, depression, and to be imprisoned for the rest of his life. Yet, despite all this, he chooses a higher path. John, once he sees the prevision for his future murder, has to start on a journey into the darkness of the city and the darkness inside of himself in order to prove his innocence or figure out why he would commit such a crime.
I'll get eye scanned a dozen times before I get within 10 miles of pre-crime.
Sometimes, in order to see the light, you have to risk the dark.
Carl Jung used the stories in Greek mythology of a man going through intense trials in order to gain wisdom as a parallel to the psychological journey one goes to gain emotional maturity and enlightenment. The journey into the dark and haunted aspects of our own unconscious. The Nikia, or katabasis, are what these stories are referred to. Nikia is the rite by which ghosts are called up and questioned about the future, and katabasis means to descend down. A classic example is from the Odyssey, where Odysseus descends into Hades to find the soul of the blind prophet Tiresias, in order to consult him about how to return home. Anderton, to make it back to his home, that is, by avoiding capture and remaining free, is told to find his Minority Report by accessing Agatha's previsions. Agatha holds the same importance as Tiresias, the key to enlightenment, the key to truth and therefore liberation. Once Odysseus receives the knowledge he needs from Tiresias, he lingers in the underworld, which causes even more souls of the dead to surround and, soon after, mob him to ask about their loved ones. Similarly, Anderton, once he learns the truth about his future from Agatha, starts finding real-life manifestations from the prevision of his killing of Crow, and instead of taking Agatha's advice to walk away, decides to indulge in his curiosity. Why would he murder? He lingers in the realm of his own underworld, where, taking the metaphor of the previsions as inner fantasies of dark impulse and intentionality, he is surrounded by the shades and ghosts of his dark unconscious, where he is capable of terrible things. Within the realm of the underworld, Odysseus sees Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down, also he can push it back up once more. Albert Camus made a parallel between Sisyphus and modern man to comment on the absurdity of life, that a person's toiling is, overall, futile and meaningless. The existential angle again. Anderton is journeying deeper into himself with each step. If he is haunted by an existential life, blotting out whatever tender emotion exists within, feeling the pain of each push, as it were, then he wishes to understand the truth about himself. What has the world turned him into? Is there anything good about him left? Whatever is in that room that makes him kill Crow, can he overcome it? Can he return home? Tiresias is the guide to the destination, an idyllic existence full of what our hearts truly desire: love, peace, rest. Agatha, mirroring Tiresias, is the same guide to the same destination. She is the embodiment of the higher order that the existential man can never gain, the light in a dark world.
He knows. Don't go home.
In The Hero's Journey, popularized by Joseph Campbell, who used Jung's perspective on mythology to break down the stages of the monomyth, a protagonist has to leave their home or natural world and go into the unknown or spiritual world in order to overcome some great obstacle and bring balance to the natural world. Before they enter the spiritual world, though, they must gain supernatural aid so as to aptly prepare for the trials awaiting them in the unknown. The monomyth is a homogenized version of the stories told through various cultures around the world. The idea behind these tales is that they pass down useful information to future generations, namely, how do we defeat the problems that exist outside the familiar? What threatens our lives? The monsters and darkness in faraway places that sit atop and block what is of true worth. From treasures such as a magical sword or an elixir to a reward that resonates inwardly, such as greater wisdom and insight, or reconciliation with a lover. The driving question behind the monomyth is, can the hero overcome the obstacles and trials to accomplish their goals? Can they succeed in making themselves better in order to make the world around them better? The beauty of this scene is that there is no lead up to John making this decision. We're led to believe that it is absolutely inevitable that he is going to kill Crow, so when he doesn't, a new, previously unknown door has opened in the claustrophobic, nightmare-inducing room of existential dread. It's the door of freedom, new possibilities, forgiveness, rightness, the door of the supernatural offered to Anderton by Agatha, the door of heaven. In taking the help of the precog, John has turned a corner from the sickness he was steeped in and, subsequently, turned a corner for us as well. The hero in the hero's journey is us. We journey with the hero into the darkness. We feel their pain, their struggle, and most importantly, feel the relief and positivity of their success. The monomyth is preparing us for our own plights, teaching us of the tools we'll need to overcome our own obstacles and trials. And in the film and the journey of the hero, supernatural aid is a necessity because without it, we are deterministically destined to be defeated. Although John's character is relatively unchanged from the beginning of the film to his turning point at the moment he's predicted to murder, the theme of existentialism versus romanticism is sprinkled throughout. A prime example is when Anderton is recovering from a surgery where his eyes were removed and swapped out with different eyes to fool the scanners that would lead to his capture. This follows his conversation with one of the creators of pre-crime, who informs him that in order to see the light, he must risk the dark. And here he is, in the dark, blinded by the procedure. He wakes violently from a dream in which he relives his son's kidnapping and works his way over to the fridge where a sandwich and some milk has been left. Unbeknownst to him, there's a moldy version of each item that's also in the fridge. Disgusted by the sandwich, he grabs the spoiled milk. This is brilliant symbolism that sets up the third act of the film. The protagonist exists in the dark because of his trauma. It was the kidnapping of his son that allows him to be set up for the murder, which causes him to be on the run from pre-crime and forces him to swap out his eyes. There he stumbles for sustenance, but, unable to see, grabs the rotten sandwich and milk instead of the fresh. We all need something in our lives. For our thoughts, for our consciousness. A proper food, that is, a proper philosophy, order, and overall truth, which will provide us what is healthy for our thoughts, and therefore our actions. But in the dark, there, because of the trap of existence, how can we find what we need?
Can you see?
See what?
Isn't it random chance that we stumble upon a truth, a morsel of beneficial information? Isn't it more common to stumble upon the opposite of what we need? The unhealthy, the corrupt, the unsavory? The rotten meal is existentialism, meaninglessness, breeding dread and misery, a life without spirituality, God, or heavenly order. The fresh meal is Romanticism, or the means by which we find the freedom to escape our trials within, away from the external, away from the effect of tragic circumstances. If one of the axioms for living inside the existential frame of mind is, whatever can be done to prevent suicide, the meditation on the meaninglessness and absurdity of life being the reason for killing oneself, then, undoubtedly, this is the opposite of food. It is like a poison that the more we eat of, the worse we are and feel. If one values their intellects and identities to the extent that they simply forego nutrition, the fundamental goodness that people need to make it through life successfully, then is it worth it to remain who they are, to keep what they have, regardless of what their existence has brought on, and where it will inevitably lead?
Wait a second!
Despite Anderton changing his mind about not killing Crow, Crow grabs the gun and ends up killing himself. Lamar told him that his family would be taken care of if he allowed John to murder him. The desperation brought on by the trap of existence dictating his actions. Burgess, out of his own desperation, set up John so he wouldn't find out the truth about Agatha's mother, Anne Lively, someone he had to kill when she wanted her daughter back, threatening the dream of pre-crime with the absence of its key precog. Maybe there's something else.
Can you see? It's beautiful.
Something outside the limits of our understanding, of our rationale. Something bubbling up from within, be it love, or hope, or a connection to the supernatural. A romantic notion, to be sure. After the incident with Crow, John drives to meet Lara. There, Agatha goes up to Sean's old room, and Anderton tries to figure out who set him up and why. The camera rushes in on Agatha as something is absorbed by her psychic abilities, ripples from the past. Sean, a loving household, a tragic death. John puts together that Lamar is behind his run-in with Crow and goes to Agatha to confirm his suspicions. Sean's room is washed out with light. A curtain blows like a ghostly presence behind John and Lara. A haunted room, a haunted memory, the ghost of a dead child weighing on them.
Dr. Hinneman once said the dead don't die. They look on and help. Remember that, John.
The first mention of an afterlife in the film coming from what is essentially an angel, a supernatural visitor with a hopeful message. She goes on to describe Lara and John's relationship with their son, full of loving, good moments.
There's so much love in this house.
She continues with telling about the love Sean had for animals, a personality lost. Then she describes a potential future where Sean goes to college and runs just like his dad and proposes to a girl when he's 23. This scenario is met with confusion, but the two listen as if they're hearing about Sean's future, a hope that their boy could be still alive, could still have a life, rekindled. Then she describes how Sean runs across the university and in the stadium where John watches. He's healthy, thriving, what any parent wants for their child. But then the potential future comes crashing down when she explains how Sean sees his dad watching him and wants to run to him, but can't because he's only 6 years old, and the other men around him are so fast. They had the chance to develop, and he did not. eternally stuck at the age he was taken, abused, and killed. Both John and Lara break down with their pain.
There was so much love in this house.
I want it back so bad.
Agatha points out that her mother wanted the same thing, her child back, but now it's too late. John thinks she's still alive, since the murder must have been stopped by pre-crime, but since Lamar rigged the system to get away with murder, she is not. Agatha indicates that her mother is alive, but, like Sean, only through the lens of an afterlife. Romanticism, at its best, indicates that there is more to a person than the cold, rationalizing mind, that love is important and matters, that the supernatural shouldn't be dismissed, that people shouldn't be repressed by any external force and for any reason. Agatha brings these points to the surface, and within a matter of moments, provides a balm to John and Lara's wounds, hope that Sean may survive on past the point of death, a reminder to cherish the good memories, and not to lose the love that, at one point, filled the house. To hold on to that love, to not let it drift away into an existential hole, is also a choice, one that John can either pick up or move away from. Both he and Lara let it slip away once, giving into hopelessness, playing into the horrors of a meaningless world, but maybe it doesn't have to remain that way. Hope and love, via the supernatural, can find its way back into one's life, and the trap of existence does not have to dictate to them who they are. That is, if they can outrun what, in the midst of their psyches, is oppressing them.
I'm sorry, Dawn. But you're gonna have to run again. Run!
There's a large emphasis on running in Minority Report. The characters riff off the theme with,
Gotta keep running.
Gotta keep running. Everybody runs.
even the movie poster underscores this motif. Running here illustrates a desperate escape from pre-cops, but in a greater context, away from the world, to escape the trap of existence. If pre-cops are a metaphor for the psychological consequences of our shadows, the punishment of the darkness within, then the film is saying that despite our desire to avoid and evade, there is an inevitability to our actions because we are who we are. And we really, after all, have no choice. Young wrote of the consequences of suppressing the shadow, warning that the more we try to keep it hidden, the blacker and denser it will become. He suggested shadow integration as a means to understand ourselves and become aware of why we feel and think the way we do. Bring the darkness into the light, so to speak. This is a good idea. But what if we can't overcome or utilize what we find, the monster from the hero's journey mythos? What if we journey into the unknown realm inside ourselves and are ill-equipped to defeat what we find? According to the premise of the tales told in cultures throughout time, the wisdom of our ancestors, it's the supernatural assistance that is needed to overcome the darkness found throughout the world, found within ourselves. Everybody may run, true, but this tactic, though seemingly successful for a bit, in the end leaves us exhausted, paranoid, and fearful. What inside of me is bringing forth these horrible things outside of me? The consequences, the punishment we're trying to avoid, having to evade ourselves, suppress our dark impulses and thoughts. There's three aspects of ourselves that are pointed out in the film. Our state of interaction. This is our state in the world and the interactions that we experience with our bodies. Our state of mind. This is our thoughts and feelings as they respond to our interactions. And our state of being. This is the center of ourselves, who we are at our innermost level. The trap of existence through Anderton's interaction with the world wears on his mind and affects his feelings. He cannot escape his fate. He is destined to let his pain drive him to deep, irreversible error. It is only when he, metaphorically, journeys into the darkness inside of himself, into the unknown spiritual world of the monomyth, that he finds Agatha. There he takes her by force away from what guards her. That is whatever mechanism in us that keeps a lid on our shadow. When set free from her shadowy prison, she takes on her angelic quality and becomes a guide to Anderton on the rest of his journey, the supernatural help that the hero needs to overcome his obstacle. John confronts his monster or greatest challenge from the section of the hero's journey called the Abyss, which is his propensity to murder, and slays it by not murdering. Agatha, symbolically speaking, is what the Romantics were aspiring towards, the freedom from within that overcomes and changes the external. Without this bright center, the perfect place at the foundation of our being, there perhaps is no hope of choosing a higher path. When John is arrested by pre-crime, he is given a halo and placed in containment. A halo puts people into a sleep-like state where their fantasies become reality, a dream of a better life. From here, Lara finds out that Lamar is behind everything that happened with John, with Anne Lively, and she breaks Anderton out of containment. John then exposes Burgess for his murder. Lamar, in retaliation, sets out to and is therefore predicted to kill John, but instead kills himself because he, like Anderton, chooses a relatively higher path by knowing his future and deciding against it. And now that pre-crime is shown to be fallible because Lamar didn't murder John as foreseen, it is shut down and the prisoner is released. John reunites with his wife, and they're set to have another child. The precogs live the rest of their days in peace, far away from the disturbing ripples created by others within the metaphysical fabric. A happy ending that perfectly parallels the sections The Resurrection and The Return with the Elixir from the end of the monomyth. The Resurrection, paralleling John's breakout from containment to confront Lamar, is the final life or death ordeal in which the hero takes all he has learned from the spiritual world and applies it to the ordinary world. And Return with the Elixir is where the hero takes what he has gained from the spiritual world and restores and heals the ordinary world, which is what John accomplishes when he proves pre-crime fallible, helps free the prisoners from containment, and aids the precogs in escaping their imprisonment. Anderton, symbolically, by finding the bright supernatural center within his being, overcomes the darkness in his unconscious mind and subsequently the darkness within the world. The film's version of Romanticism wins. But in such a dystopian world, is this eventuality realistic? The crushing weight of meaninglessness. The ending is totally different from the rest of the film, maybe even jarring in how the world is remade so completely and so quickly. The Übermensch mind that opposes spiritual freedom is defeated, followed by reconciliation, liberation, a dream come true.
It's actually kind of a rush. They say you have visions, that your life flashes before your eyes, that all your dreams come true.
When John went into containment, did he come out? Is the ending a wish fulfillment? His deepest desires crystallized within the glow of a halo? That would certainly make sense. John's parallel to the resurrection and return with the elixir didn't really happen because the world is too harsh a place to overcome and change. This view of the film turns the story into a tragedy instead of a triumph over the evil embedded in the external, which is similar to Orwell's 1984, and that the overarching system wins and snuffs out the expression of the tender emotionality within the protagonist. Meaning that instead of this being the ultimate climax of the movie, this is an upsurge of romanticism, of spiritual freedom, of faith in something beyond the physical, beyond the oppressiveness of existence, followed by an immediate arrest of such a state. And here, at the end of his life in society, at the end of his time interacting with the world, all that is left is what John truly wants, distilled in him through Agatha, and reflected in what we see at the end of the film. But, in lieu of that future coming to pass, all that he can express is,